Welcome to the Project Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Gorey, mom of a sweet baby girl and an ever-evolving entrepreneur. On this show, we will explore the intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. We will share stories of moms just like you and me with the goal of fostering community and comfort in knowing that we are not alone in our experiences. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to ensure you get all the updated episodes and releases. Welcome to today's episode of the Project Mom Podcast. I am thrilled to be chatting with Lindsay Roselle today. Lindsay is a growth and performance coach for high-achieving women who are looking to find harmony between their desire to succeed and their devotion to motherhood. She is also the host of the Motherload podcast, which expands her work exploring mindset, money, and meaning, and how the mental load of motherhood affects all three. Lindsay is also a mom to 2 little boys and lives with them and her partner in Northern Colorado. So Lindsay, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm really happy we got to reschedule this. I know we just touched on this a little bit, but cold season is in full force right now, and we rescheduled this just once and then the appearance on yours as well a couple of times. And I feel like we are just getting hit whenever we are down. And I feel like as moms who are also entrepreneurs and we're trying to grow something for ourselves, when our kids get sick or when we get sick, it just really throws a wrench in things. So I am appreciative of you and your flexibility and that we could finally get this on the books. So with that, just how is your family doing? How are your boys doing okay with these colds?
Yeah, I did an episode on my podcast several months ago that was like breaking down the mental load of motherhood. And one of the buckets I lump in under the mental load of motherhood is parenting. And I was like, and parenting could just be the only bucket and it would still be a lot. And under parenting, dealing with sickness and illness could be the only bucket and it would still be a lot. Because from like age, 0 to 7, I feel like kids are just sick, like constant. Someone always has a runny nose and goo coming out of somewhere. No, but everybody mostly on the mend, like the lingering cough I still hear them coughing at night a little bit. Just the cold bugs, back to school cold bugs, no capital C virus or anything going around. But yeah, it feels just endless this time of year. And then, of course, I got it a week off from when RT got it, my partner. So one of us was sick for like a full month. And I'm just like, how does anybody function like this? But then, yeah, I talked to other moms and other people like me, like you, and I'm like, oh, nope, we're all in it together. So it's just one of those things, I guess.
That's the crazy part about it. This is probably the worst cold I have had since my daughter's been born. She's 21 months and I absolutely got it from her. She picked it up on some playground. I don't know. And it was really hard for me to take a rest. Like I felt awful. I mean, you had emailed me one morning. I was like, I have to reschedule. And I was like, oh, thank God. And then the next day I emailed you and I was like, I have to reschedule today. Like I can't. And that part of me feels really guilty doing that and taking that time to like just take a nap or to rest and say, we need to put this on the burner next week. And I mean, do you feel any of that? Like, how do you give yourself permission to support yourself in sickness? Because it's really hard as a mom.
Yeah. I mean, support myself is one thing. And then to just be present for my kids, because when I'm not sick, but they are, I have a nanny and I have childcare. So oftentimes I'm like, okay, I know they're sick, but someone else can watch them. But the reality is a sick kid wants his mom, at least my kids do. And that really weighs on me. So it's when I'm sick, it's one thing. When they're sick, it's a whole other thing. And I'm getting better at giving myself permission. My kids are now 3 and 5. And it's like, I see the runny nose start and I'm like, well, okay, clear the schedule, but it causes me a lot of anger. I mean, I get very resentful over the lack of control on it, where I'm like, I'm doing everything. Like we sleep well, we have good hygiene, we take our vitamins, but they're kids. Like there's nothing you can do. Like if your kid doesn't get sick, they're a freak of nature, so it's not like good moms' kids don't get sick and bad moms' kids get sick or something like that. It's like, no, they're developing immune systems and we live in a weird time where they didn't have exposure for 2 years and now they're catching up. And so I do get frustrated, especially when I'm sick, because I'm just like, I hate this feeling. I hate not feeling good in my body. And then on top of that, I hate getting behind. And then I'm at a place in my life and business where getting behind just compounds, because the further behind I get, the further when I go to catch up, it's just this big wave of catch up. And then there's no like good rhythm anymore, you know, and I'm really working on rhythm in my life of like keeping everything moving at a good pace consistently versus like work and then don't work, don't work, because that really does not work for me. So illness really is a challenge in the development of rhythm and pace department for me. And it's one of the hardest parts of being a mother, honestly. Like they want me, they love their dad and he's obviously helpful when they're sick, but they wake up in the middle of the night coughing or sick, they want me. They're home from school and they're just watching movies, like they want mom to sit next to them and cuddle, you know? I'm like, okay. So really just surrendering to like being frustrated, getting behind, and then being present in it all, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on a couple of things that I think is like really important to highlight, which is this like feeling of wanting to be in control in a lot of things and finding this rhythm and this pace. And how do we just surrender to kind of everything that's happening around us and either allow time to heal some things, or do we kind of step into our power a bit and support ourselves and empower ourselves to make some changes for it to work? So I definitely want to touch into all of that. But before we do, I would love for you to just share a little bit with us about your entrepreneurial journey. So how did you start becoming a performance and growth coach for women? What was the journey to get here? And then where did motherhood fit into that for you?
Yeah. So I actually worked in the corporate world for about 10 years coming out of college into my early 30s, and got to a point in that career where I felt like I didn't see a way that it was ever going to be fulfilling. And I was so aware of all the things that people talk about now, you know, like now it's cool to like quit if you're not appreciated and you don't, you know, you're expected to work more than you're paid for and all this stuff. Back then, like I quit in 2014. I was like, I just don't feel like this is it for me. You know, like I feel the glass ceiling. I feel the inequity around gender. I worked in the energy industry, so that was very apparent. There was just a lot of like lifestyle factors that didn't work for me. I traveled a ton, all of that. So I had the inkling for entrepreneurship. My dad's an entrepreneur. I'd had it kind of all my life, but I went through yoga teacher training in 2009 or 10 and had this experience in the yoga studio that I was trained in where I was like, you know what? I can do this. Like, I want to open a yoga studio. I would do it a little differently than this corporate yoga studio does it. And the part of town I lived in doesn't have a local, like a studio that's close by. I want to do this. And I just kind of like figured it out, like wrote a business plan and talked to the landlord at the space and all these things. And it was really serendipitous that it ended up all kind of falling into place. And my stepmom came on as like a business partner and the general manager. So I had already been 2 years into owning that brick and mortar yoga studio when I quit my job in 2014. So my first real entrepreneurial experience was in brick and mortar, like storefront, local business, yoga studio, teachers, staff, you know, scheduling, all kinds of customer service. Got thrown into the fire in that type of business in terms of really like, it's not an easy business to scale. It's got a lot of customer service needs. Like, there's just a lot to a brick and mortar service-based business like that. So I learned a lot with that. And then within a few years after quitting my corporate job and owning this yoga studio, I really started to feel like, well, I did some consulting. So I was kind of getting into coaching and consulting as a side project with the yoga studio. I especially was focusing on health and wellness business owners because I was one and I had figured out a lot of things. And I have an MBA and things like that. So I was like more of a business mind in the wellness space than most people I met, you know, other yoga studio owners and stuff that had no business experience. So I started coaching and consulting in the wellness space. And then all of that kind of led me in the years leading up to COVID from like 2015 to 2020 into really launching a whole company that was focused on helping women who owned local small businesses. And that business was called Women and Inc. And it really had a focus on local small business owners. We had mastermind groups, we ran events, we were about to expand all over the country when COVID hit. So because it was an in-person based business, as is the best for local business, you know, it was really the idea of that business was to bring women-owned local businesses together in their regional and local markets, because most local businesses don't have nationwide scale capability. Like their scale is limited by their local region. And so working with like an online business coach in a local small business, a lot of the stuff doesn't apply, And so it was a really specialized type of coaching and consulting in that business. Then COVID hit, that whole market got decimated because so many local businesses, including mine, I lost the yoga studio during COVID, and I shut down Women in Ink because it was an in-person based events company primarily. And so without the yoga studio anymore, post-COVID, I kind of turned my focus back more towards this coaching and consulting world. And coming out of COVID, really started to see the need and feel the need in myself around, like I've had a lot of success. I've run, my consulting business was a multi-six-figure consulting business. My brick and mortar business was multi-six-figure. Like I have a lot of, and now I have e-com stores that are 6 and 7 figure. Like I know a lot about a lot of different kinds of business. The thing that's different now is now I have kids, and everything is different for me in terms of how those businesses feel day to day to me now that I'm a mother. And once I had my second son in 2019 and went through what happened in 2020, losing businesses and kind of having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and, all this stuff over the last couple of years, I really realized there's a whole different experience if you're a mom trying to do this kind of thing than if you are not. And there's a lot of like boss babe, like teaching people how to run businesses. And that's great. And there's also a lot of parenting and like how to be a good mom, but not a whole lot that really speaks to how to grow and run a business as a mother who is still really devoted to motherhood. Because I think there's a lot of like polarization out there around like, be the boss mom, the mompreneur, like blah, blah, blah. But like it really centers the business. And I was like, what about, I still want to get to 7 figures. I still want to have a lot of success, but I want to do it in a way where I'm still really present with my kids. And if they're sick, I can take the day off and not feel like every dollar I make is dependent on me. And that model has evaded even me. I've really had to learn how to do that. So like over the last year, as I really kind of landed in the question for myself of how do I continue to grow? How do I get back to being like a high performer? Because I haven't felt high performance through COVID and young kids. As I try to like re-routine my life and really like get more intentional and optimize things and stay really devoted to motherhood, what does that look like? And how do I do that? And out of that, plus a little bit of plant medicine, I went to Peru and had an experience with ayahuasca that kind of like brought all this into focus for me. I landed here in this like, I think I call it growth and performance coaching because it's really, that's the only like name that's out there for it, but it's truly like looking at, I just said to a client today, it's like the home edit, but for your mental load. Like I really work with high performing women who have had success, who want it to feel uncluttered and clear. Not that they want it to feel easy, but they want to feel like they have some control and there's some systemization, but it's not just about coming into their business or their career and making that work better. It's looking at their whole life as one thing and saying, hey, in order for you to open another location, you're probably going to need to work another hour later for 3 months. And that means you aren't going to be able to do pickup. So let's figure out what that looks like for you. And does that feel okay? Is that a sacrifice you're willing to make for your kids? And if so, then what's the logistics around getting someone else to do pickup so you can work an hour later? And like, that's a huge ask of a mom, as you know. And so that's a lot of what I work with my clients on is looking at decisions in the business or in their career that would help the business or the career grow, but have an impact on life and on motherhood. And how are we harmonizing all those things together? So,
yeah, Lindsay, that's amazing. Honestly, I think it's such, I don't want to say it feels like a unique concept, but I have not quite heard it talked about in that capacity, right? This ability or a focus on how do we marry the two identities for ourselves. Because one of the things that is kind of flashing across my mind as you're talking is when I first had my daughter, the first year of her life was really hard for me. And I felt like I had lost a piece of myself. I had done something very similar. I had, stepped out of the corporate world after about 8 years. I took some time off, didn't even know what I wanted to do, had a baby, went into lockdown for COVID. She was born at the end of 2020. And, it's like in the middle of everything changing. And, the first year I had a really difficult time, like reconciling, like, how do I also do me? How do I also include what Emily likes to do and what motivates me and lights me up and stimulates my brain and makes me feel like the human that I am still. Perhaps I look a little and feel a little bit differently than before. My priorities are different, but how do you marry the two? So I really honor you for looking at that as a whole and through the lens of everything, because there is a lot of dueling narrative of, to be a high achieving businesswoman, there's sacrifices you have to make on the home end. But to be a good mom, there's also this narrative that you have to sacrifice on the business side of things. So from your perspective, like, what has been the biggest takeaway for you in order to find that high achieving power performance mode again? Like, what's kind of been the biggest focus for you?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing for me, the easiest way to say it is I learned to prioritize myself, which can sound controversial. And I think an older version of me, or I guess a younger, an age version of me
Yeah.
would have heard someone say that and be like, like you can't put yourself first when you're a mom. But now it's literally what I make my clients look at and what I have done for myself. And I realized in hindsight, looking at how everything kind of fell apart for me in 2020 and how I had to rebuild in 2021, it was this long lead up of putting myself at the bottom of the priorities. It was like business is first because I am wired to achieve, and I've been an achiever since my childhood. And I have, as of 2020, I had like 6 businesses, and I had a lot of my identity and a lot of like ego tied up in business. And so that was always my first priority. Then it was my kids, because they kind of have to be the next priority in terms of the demand, and
the need. Mm-hmm.
and everything they need from me. And just those 2 things alone were so depleting, as young kids and a bunch of businesses that were in growth mode. Then my relationship was like 3rd on the list, which meant it got very little focus. And that was to our detriment, because we went through quite a bit of problems, that we repaired through 2020, 2021. And then myself was always last. So like, that means I never felt good in my body. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't working out. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't dealing with my inner work stuff. I was feeling a lot of resentment and a lot of resistance to my life and how it was all playing out, but not expressing it and not looking at it. And since then, the thing that's really switched for me and has been the only way I can navigate what we talked about in the beginning with sickness coming up and all this stuff is like, I flipped the order. So now I make it a point that like, I am my first priority. And that's not to say like my ego is more important than what my kids need. It's absolutely not that, but it is myself first. And then is my relationship, because in my world, if my relationship is not stable and solid and we are, having great communication and there's a lot of warmth and love there, then I'm not okay, which means like the whole system's off, right? And then it's my kids, because the kids are pretty resilient and they can, as long as they're getting me showing up really well and they're getting dad showing up really well, they're fine, and they're resilient to days that I need to work more and days that I need to work less. And then I put the businesses forth, where it's like, you know what? Like, I'm sick, dad's sick, kids are sick. Well, the businesses don't get anybody's attention today, and that's just how it's going to be. An older version of me I would have said like, shit, I still got to work. I still have to get on these calls and I can't cancel podcast interviews. Like, I've got to show up sick. I'll just take a bunch of Dayquil and hope the kids, screaming in the background can, and I would have pushed through. And so it's that flipping of their priority. And it's not something that I like have an ego about, or that I tell people, I'm like, hey, Emily, I can't work today. I got to put myself first. It's not something where I think about my needs are more important, but it's looking at, is making this choice today to do this thing or not do this thing or whatever it is that going to put me out of alignment where the whole rest of the system feels my stress and feels my depletion? Or is this decision going to assist me in feeling better, or assist me in making more money, or, whatever the goal is? And in doing that makes me better. Therefore, my relationship feels my like light energy. My kids feel my light energy. My business feels my light energy. That is just a constant question for me. And I've taught myself how to do that inquiry through the last few years of deep inner work and really learning what my habits and patterns are, and looking at being able to hold myself accountable and kind of call myself out on feeling patterns reemerge, and going inward when I feel that stuff start to happen, to be like, okay, I've made three choices in a row that feel like this was an out of alignment decision for me that I did anyway. What's going on, Lindsay? Like, what are you responding to where you're saying yes to things that you don't want to do? It's like, ooh, well, I'm responding to scarcity because I'm feeling like we need a little more money. We're heading into the holidays. I'm saying yes to clients, or I'm doing stuff in our ecom business that I don't want to be doing, but and it's like, okay, gut check, like this is a scarcity habit. So that's just an example. But for me, when I put myself first and I really look at what do I need so that I stay in the best performance, the best, like the best mindset, so that everyone down the line gets the best of me, it really requires me to show up present in my work with myself and really honest with myself. And that has not always been my mode of operating. And so that's what I've learned, and that's what I teach.
Yeah. I mean, it's really remarkable because I do something similar in terms of prioritization and self-care, and I journal every single day, but it has taken me a handful of years to get to the point of awareness where I can feel in my body that something's off, and I can take a few minutes to think into what am I responding to? What am I reacting to? Why are my choices making me feel a little bit out of zone? And I really appreciate that kind of awareness that you put on it as well, because I think sometimes I did a solo episode on self-care and what that looks like. And some of it feels really floofy, and it's really hard work, right? To be able to prioritize yourself and to allow and give yourself permission to do that. So I'd love for you if you could share, like, how did you get to the point, or what support system did you use in order to get to the point where you could recognize this awareness? Like, were there books that you read? Did you, leverage a coach for yourself? Was it your journey with some plant medicine? Like, how did you get to the point where like you made the decision to do something different? And then what did that growth healing journey look like for you to reprioritize yourself?
Yeah. So for me, unfortunately, and I don't wish this on anybody, it was hitting total rock bottom in 2020, fall of 20, about this time, actually, October 2020. We closed 2 businesses in September of 2020, mostly because they were in person. And there was just, even though the world was kind of slightly-ish, kind of opening back up at that time, a yoga studio, heated yoga studio where people get sweaty within a couple feet of each other was just not something that, not that I wasn't comfortable with it, because I was, but the clientele, I just knew they weren't going to come back at the level they would need to in order for us to be able to run the business sustainably. And that cost a ton of money to get out of that. We had a corporate landlord, and they absolutely did not do anything for us in terms of allowing any grace with the cost of, breaking a lease. And so that cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the other business was also an in-person based business, and just had a lot of stuff looped up in it that I was just resistant to around local business. Having closed my yoga studio, I was no longer a local business owner. And so I was like, I don't really want to have a coaching and consulting and mastermind company for local business owners. So I really hit rock bottom from the entrepreneurial identity at that time. And then at the exact same time, my relationship was in the worst place it had ever been in. And we separated. And that really, both of those things happening within a month of each other was just absolutely floor. Like it was the bottom, and the way that RT handled the separation, he left, and that kind of left me to solo parent for a while. And, we've worked through it all now, and we did a ton of counseling, and that was a part of what got me on the healing path. But really hitting rock bottom is what it took for me and my personality type that's so distanced from, I'm an Enneagram 3, like really distanced from my emotions for most of my life, for me to really feel what it felt like to be in this place where I could have easily blamed a lot of other things. And I'm smart enough to like look for all of those other things to blame. And I found them all, but in that moment, I caught myself and I was like, okay, but there's a reason we ended up here. And I've got to figure that out for myself, or this will be my destiny, And so for me, it was hitting rock bottom. I hope that that's not the thing for most people. But even if you feel yourself headed that way, you can stop and you can do the work. And for me, doing the work from that day on, when like end of October when he left, and it was really, really left me sitting there going like, I just lost both my businesses and my partner all in a month's time. Like, how did this happen? The next day I woke up and I wrote this really long letter to myself, and I was like, this is what happened, and it was like almost dissociative, but is like this part of my identity writing to this other part of my identity. Like, here's all the things we know to be true that you haven't looked at. And I wrote all that out, and it was like, holy crap, Lindsay, like there's so much here. And this is childhood stuff, and this is wiring, and this is belief systems and money mindset and body stuff and parenting and motherhood and just generational crap and on and on and on. And I was like, okay, there is a lot here to look at. And in that moment, I said, to myself, I was like, I have a choice to make. I can stay in my patterns of looking for ways to manipulate the situation and blame other people for my own mistakes, or I can take ownership of this, focus on myself, go into my little cocoon and try my best to just not let the outward world affect this healing process. And I'm going to figure this out for myself. And luckily it was COVID. So I was able to kind of like isolate and be a hermit. And I unfollowed a ton of people. I like totally disconnected from the entire social connection scene that I had been involved in, which was part that had become pretty toxic too. And I just, every single day I got up and I did the journaling. I read a stack of I'll put it on my website at some point, like my list of the top 10 books that changed my life. The Untethered Soul, Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights, was super impactful to me. Gosh, there's tons, but I read books, I journaled, I meditated, I spent a lot of time by myself, really, really, really uncomfortable about where I was in my life and wanting to change everything and wanting to push a button and make it all feel easy again. And obviously not doing that. And then a lot of therapy, couples therapy, especially, which really helped. For me, one-on-one therapy just is not my healing modality. Like it's fine, but I did a lot of that in my 20s and that helped me understand myself better. But at this, more recently, one-on-one therapy was more, I felt like I knew a lot of what she would say back to me and I was just kind of like talking to myself. Couples therapy was very impactful because it is so different to see how someone you love and that they love you sees you in a way that you don't see yourself. And that reflection, though at times so painful to hear, I never would have meant you. What? I didn't mean that at all when I said that thing. He's like, well, that's how it felt. I'm like, oh, okay. Wow. Like how many other things have I said to people my whole life that I didn't mean it in that way, or maybe I did mean it in that way and it hurt them, And so there's so much healing that came from couples therapy and repairing the relationship. And then, more recently getting into more plant medicine and looking at generational trauma and my lineage and my especially my mom and her mother, because I have so much, I'm just so focused on this motherhood thing, and how important motherhood is to figuring out our identities and really like being who we want to be and living out the legacy we want to have for our lives. And if we're a mom, it's so easy to get lost in motherhood or in parenting and lose that. And I've spent a lot of time really looking at my lineage and looking at how many of these patterns that were so destructive to me in my business and in my relationship are from that maternal lineage. And how can I do some of that healing? And that led me into the plant medicine world just because it felt like it was at a different level of consciousness, like that stuff coming through from relatives that I've never met, like my grandmother, I only met her a couple times in my whole life, and her mother, I obviously never met. And there's unanswered questions there, but things I could feel as a mother where I'm like, I feel like there's just a lot of trauma, a lot of fear, a lot of lack of safety in motherhood. And I don't feel unsafe in my 2022 motherhood, but there's something deep in me that feels unsafe about being a mother. What is that? So that type of inquiry is what led me into plant medicine. And I've had, I did a whole episode about ayahuasca if anybody's interested, because it's a long story, but that experience really, I had a whole encounter with my grandmother in my ayahuasca journey. And that unlocked a lot of understanding around the role that our maternal lineage plays in our role as mothers today. And that has helped a lot with my just grace and compassion, especially for my own mom. And I think a lot of us, like our own mothers, have really influenced our mothering, good and bad, and having more grace and compassion for our own mothers, even if they were great moms, like my mom was an okay mom. But even if you had like a great mom and a great childhood, there's still a lot of like compassion and grace that you have for your own mother once you become one. And the plant medicine for me really drove that point home and has helped to unlock some stuff around why was I feeling resentment towards motherhood.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely link that episode that you do, because I think there is a lot of unawareness around that for a lot of women, right? What I think when we think about, for me in particular, like when I thought about motherhood, I did a lot of reflection and, self-work, inner work when I was pregnant. So before my daughter was born, there was a lot of fears that I had that came up around wanting to do things differently than the way that my mom did. And I fall into the camp of, I had a great mom. I mean, my mom is wonderful. She's still very active. Like a wonderful resource for me, that there are things that I wanted to do differently in how I related to my daughter, how I showed up with my partner as a mom, as a wife, all those things. So there's one piece I think that's on the forefront, which is how we relate to the mother figures actively in our lives. But there's also a lot of, like you said, this like lineage of our motherhoods that we just feel kind of deep down in our cores and we don't really have any light on, or we can't quite figure out why we feel a little unsafe or whatever that is. And I started reading, I'm trying to educate myself a lot more on just different opinions and perspectives on motherhood and these like traumas that we hold as women in the society we're in, where it stems from past generations. And I just read Patriarchy, Stress Disorder, and it was kind of the first introduction for me into kind of how, as women, not necessarily just as moms, but women in the business world, how do we interact with this space that was created for us? What traumas are we holding based on our moms' moms, that they did what they had to do in order to survive their current experiences and situations? And it's interesting because you said it right. In 2020, 2022, like, you felt safe, but there's some reason why you felt unsafe in this role. And we could go down a whole line of everything that's happening around us right now. We don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. But there is a lot, I think, that like we should be opening our minds to as moms and as just as women in general, to see like, what are we holding on to that is not for us to hold anymore? Can we give ourselves the grace and compassion for our moms, our mother figures, our partners who also are growing up and learning from a society that tells them how to act and what to expect about themselves, even too. Like, feel like biggest thing for me and my husband is like the roles that we play in our home, and how do we agree on what should be done and when, and who's bringing in money and who's working, and what do the days look like? And it's not just something we learned in this moment. It's years and decades and hundreds of years of like belief systems that were passed down to us through our parents and their parents before them. So there's really a lot of awareness. So I really appreciate you highlighting all of that, because I think it's something we don't think about very often.
No, I mean, I talk about this a lot because it blows my mind. Like, my parents are boomers. I'm 40. My parents are in their late 60s. They were born in the 50s, like the mid 50s. Their parents were born in like the 30s and were the first generation to leave the farm. Like, my grandparents grew up on farms, but my mom's mom was a nurse and my mom's dad was a doctor. So it was like they went in one generation from like large families who lived on farms in rural Kansas to doctor who lived in a city, who had more money, who had only 3 kids instead of 10, like just huge shift in lifestyle, and with no tools around like emotional regulation of moving from the core family stays together on the farm generation after generation. And there's a lot of trauma. Yeah. Like, you have 10 or 12 kids, several of them die. I'm like, oh my God, a child dying. Like, in 2022, we're like, oh yeah, kids used to die on the farm. You had 14 kids and people would die like cholera and stuff. But now you're a mom and you're like, okay, but a child dying is extremely traumatic, even if it happened 200 years ago on the farm. Like, think of how much of that emotional trauma is just in there. And then you send a whole generation, our grandparents, out into the world to like, go to college, become educated, like go do these things. And the world changes so fast after World War II. And, and then our parents are in that first generation of like raised by people who were so locked up in their own experience of this whole new world and things changing so quickly that they didn't necessarily know how to teach our parents a ton of warmth, or, like, our parents were navigating parenthood in a whole different way than their parents. And then us as millennial, like, I'm a millennial, I'm an elder millennial, whatever, and my parents really tried to do it differently than their parents, but still weren't super emotionally educated on how to. And then you get to our generation where it's like, we have so much education, so many tools, and so much like meta analysis. And we are so intentional with our children now to do it differently. And I'm like, we're only 3 generations back from people who like lived on farms and had 10 kids. And several of those kids died of diseases that we now like go to the doctor for and get some medicine, and like, we're not talking 1,000 years ago. We're talking, some of these people are still alive, and how much our motherhood experience has changed in like 100 years in just a few generations. And of course, we're carrying some of that fear, and just primal fear, primal lack of safety is still in our DNA because we're only a couple generations back from people who fully lived in that. And so it blows my mind. I'm like, I have this super comfortable existence here in 2022. And my grandmother, who's no longer alive, but like she grew up on a farm with 12 siblings, and her mom died when she was 11, and she was the oldest girl at home. So she took over as mom at age 11 on a farm. I'm like, my grandmother, it's crazy to me. So I think most of us, we don't necessarily think like that. But if you stop and you're like, what was your grandmother's experience of life as a mother? And you're like, holy crap, so hard, compared to mine. The things that she was dealing with no education around emotional regulation or trauma. And now we have those words. So I think as mothers in this day and age, like, not even to speak to what we're dealing with that's current, but what we have carried forward is massive. And to me, that is work that has to be done. And when you look at your inner child and you look at what messages you picked up from your mom, just by observing her and her motherhood, I love it. And there's no judgment, like my mom and I talk really candidly about my perception of her as a mother, as a child. And she's really open to hearing it because it's fascinating to her too, And so that's like part of my mission is I hope that we can have more of these conversations with our mothers. And even if you're a man and you're not a mother, it's like, talk to your mom about motherhood and do you really understand your mom's experience of motherhood and her experience of her mother's motherhood and on back? Because I think a lot of that is where these systems of trauma or systems of stuff play out in our families. And we blame it on like current stuff, like some of it's current, but a lot of this stuff is patterns that have come down through generations that are impacting these feelings we have that we can't express why we feel a certain way. I'm like, well, let's look a couple generations back. I bet we'll know why,
Yeah, absolutely. And then you think about too, right? If you think about your mother, like I think about mine in particular, and it's like, what did she learn, right, from her mom who was in that particular situation and didn't know how to regulate? Like my grandmother she passed earlier this year, and she was possibly one of my favorite humans on this planet, but she was a tough cookie. Like she did not show a lot of emotion. Like I knew just from the time that we spent together, like the love that she had for her family, but she wasn't very open about like verbally, sharing those emotions and, telling her kids or her grandkids, like how proud of them she was. Like they didn't get a lot of that. And I give my mom a lot of credit because she was very supportive of my sister and I, like very much did it differently than the way her mom did it. And you have to give them credit. And then, you look at yourself and you're like, how can I take that one step further and do the work and to figure out how I can do this a little bit differently for my daughter, right? And how do we support that work? So I think there's so many doors that we can and should be opening to kind of understand this history and how it impacts us as mom and as women. And I want to touch a little bit on, you mentioned in your bio to me, this dark hour that you do. And I would love to give that a little bit of time because I think there's so much gold in that, in how you support yourself and what that hour looks like. So can you share with us what that looks like and what it does for you?
Yeah. So I started the dark hour. That was really unintentionally the time of day that I had to do my journaling and my reading and all of my practices during that period after I separated from RT for a while there. And it was all the businesses were gone and I was kind of in my cocoon. And, it was winter. That happened at the end of October 2020. And then we went into winter. So for 4 or 5 months from like November to February or March, I live in Colorado. It's like dark and cold. And I have, my kids are early risers. So I knew by 5:15, 5:30, I was going to have kids awake. And I was the only one home at that time. So I started getting up. And part of it was like, to be completely honest, was my anxiety level was so high at that time from what was going on that I couldn't sleep very well. So I was awake at 4 a.m. anyway. So I was like, I'm just going to make this a thing. I don't advocate this as the only way to do it, of course. But for me, when I first started it, it was like from 4 to 5 a.m. because that was the time I had before my kids were awake. instead of laying in bed, paralyzed with anxiety and running through my head of all these scenarios, it was like, let's just get up and make something of this time. And I would get my journaling done. So my typical order for a dark hour is I get up and I get my like coffee, or now I'm on to tea because I'm trying not to start with coffee at 5 a.m. because it messes with my hormones. So I'm starting with tea these days, but like I get the water going, I get my lemon water made, and I sit down and I do a short meditation. Like I'm not meditating for 20 minutes most days. It's like 1 or 2 minutes. I find one on Insight Timer or Calm, and it's just like getting the mind centered. So I start with a meditation. I like to read next. So usually I've got multiple books going. I try to like stay single streamed, but so I'll pick whatever book I'm most interested in that day, and I'll try to read for like 10 minutes. I don't have like a hard and fast rule, but usually about 10 minutes or until like the end, like some natural stopping point. And then I journal, and journaling is 5 or 10 minutes, depending on like how inspired I am. And sometimes journaling is literally like, didn't sleep very well last night, but I have this going on and I'm wondering about this in my life. And like, I did use prompts for a while. I don't use prompts anymore for that process, but I go through a body scan and I just kind of recount what happened yesterday or what's on my mind. I just get into the flow, and I always do a gratitude, 3 to 5 gratitudes and 3 to 5 manifestations. And then I put that aside, and then I do a brain dump and like an open loops, like just things that I'm spinning on and that are usually related to work. And that's always fascinating to me because I'm like, why am I not just getting these things done, And sometimes I put one up this morning, dark hour up this morning, that was like, the brain dump is only important if you actually put everything that's on your brain dump onto a to-do list on your calendar and like get it done. If you just constantly dump out the same stuff, you're just living in overwhelm. And that's where I've been the last couple of weeks. But so I do a brain dump every morning. That's like, and right now I have a running to-do list. So my brain dump is really more of a scan of the to-do list and making sure, is there anything else that needs to get on here? Is there anything that I'm done that I can take off? And then I prioritize what I'm going to do that day so that I'm kind of queuing up my day. And then I try to so once I feel good about that usually takes like 5 or 10 minutes because I'm in the practice of it now. And then I'll try to do a little bit of movement. I'm pretty consistent about like the gym and walking these days. So my movement in the mornings is literally just like some yoga, not even on a mat, or like I do in the kitchen. I'm just like, I just need to stretch and need to move. Like I need to kind of move in all planes and just feel where my body's at today. Notice what's tight. What does that say about how I slept or what's going on? And I'm drinking my water and my tea through all of this. And then, what happened with the dark hour was I was doing it so consistently and I didn't name it anything. But during that time that I was like cocooning at my house through those months, I started to share it every day on my story. I would take a picture of my journal and write up a little summary of what I had journaled about that day and what was coming up in the book I was reading or in my meditation or whatever. And a lot of people started to follow along, and like it became accountability for me that I did that daily story about what my dark hour had been that day. And I got a couple months in, and a coach of mine at the time said, you're so consistent with this, you should name it. And like, it could be something that's part of your brand. And I was like, okay, well, like it's the first hour of the day. It's still dark out, and I was like, the dark hour, perfect. And then it, just kind of stuck. And I remember the day in couples counseling 6 months after RT left. And it took us about 6 months to really repair our relationship and agree to move back in together and everything. And, I looked at my journal and I was like, this is the 180th day in a row that I've done this. And I was like, I don't think I've ever done anything in my life that this consistently. And I was super emotional. I still get emotional about it. It's like, it's something simple, but it was life changing. And it really did hold me to my work for that many days in a row. And when I look back at all those posts and I can see how my mindset was moving, it's like I'm shifting out of victimness and out of the world did this to me and everything's so hard into like, wow, I've got some patterns and some habits and some learned conditioning behaviors that are things I need to work on. And here's the books I'm reading that are helping me with this aspect or this aspect. And I started to get a ton of good feedback. Like people were following along. They were responding. They were saying, oh my God, I so needed to hear this today. So I still do it, to this. I literally posted a story this morning, and I would say my dark hour ebbs and flows these days. I journal every day. I don't always do every component anymore because like it just evolves, but the journaling is super important to me. And the brain dump and like the prioritization for the day is super important to me, because otherwise I feel like I'm so ingrained with those two now that if I miss them, if I don't do it that day, I'm like, I forgot something. What did I forget?
Yeah, it was in my brain somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So as part of what's coming out for Motherload, there'll be the dark hours incorporated. Like I'm building out a whole journal that's got that whole template for people. And because I believe, like I said, I don't think you need to get up at 4 a.m. to do it, but I do really like a period of time in your day, and it doesn't have to be an hour, but some period of time in your day where you have the focus on a ritual like that. And the ritual being self-exploration, not like just candles burning and meditating and things. It's like, that's great. Pulling cards, like, cool. I did all that. And you got to do the uncomfortable stuff too. You really need to sit there with what's coming up and what are you not getting done? Why are you not getting it done? What are you prioritizing? And is that the right things to be prioritizing? Like, it's really got to be consistent personal inquiry.
Absolutely. I think the thing that's really sticking out to me is this like brain dump that you're talking about, right? It's like, and even if it's like you're not even sure where to begin, and I think this might be my next question to you is like, how do you support clients or even just people who are following along with you to like incorporate some sort of routine like this? Because I feel like with the brain dump at a minimum, right, it's giving you insight if you're honest with yourself of really writing down on paper, like what is coming to mind? What are you scared of? What's uncomfortable for you? What do you feel like you have to get done, right? What's been floating in your brain that's weighing on you? If you can answer, those 4 questions and some, right, whatever is working for your particular situation, you're going to get a lot of insight. And then if you can commit to doing that, I think there's also to be said something for, taking a moment to reflect on that. But I feel like at a minimum, if you can at least get it on paper for a week, 2 weeks, and then eventually, right, support yourself in sitting in the uncomfortable and maybe reviewing those even, right? Going back those past 2 weeks. I mean, you had said it, 6 months of dedication every day got you to a place where you could take a next step of repair, right? And repair a relationship, but you weren't able to do it unless you looked at those things. So, I mean, what would be your best advice, or kind of how can somebody just get started on that?
I mean, I'm in this world of like, I'm just going to tell you what to do. And, with the caveat that it's different for everybody. For me, it's journaling. Like, I know it could sound cliche, and I'm sure there's been a million people in your life that have like said something about journaling and you see it all over Instagram, but there's science about writing down what you think and removing from your brain and your like subconscious mind and writing it out onto paper. Like seeing it on paper, your brain processes it differently than thinking about it. And I was just reminded of this when my son started kindergarten a couple months ago, and they were talking about why my charter school he goes to still teaches handwriting and will make them handwrite their essays until they get to 7th grade, even though we live in 2022. And they're adamant about it. And parents push back and we're like, they need to learn typing. And they're like, no, handwriting is such an important thing for your brain. And here's why. And so you can go research this. Like, this is something you can Google and learn about. But I will always be an advocate for that analog process of letting the mind take what's obscure and ambiguous and get it out onto paper, because you will be surprised by what comes out. Like, and it sounds wonky and you're like, no way. When you're first starting, it's super uncomfortable and you will just write exactly what your conscious mind is like telling you to write, and it'll feel silly. But if you sit there and you learn the practice of journaling and you really learn the practice of letting it just kind of channel out of you, and you'll be surprised by what you feel yourself wanting to write. And you're like, I'm scared of this. What? You're like, I didn't realize, like, I don't really feel afraid of that, but like, why is there a fear with this? And yeah, as an example, and there's also some prompts and stuff like that that can help you get there. But for me, the place to start would be journaling, and it would be journaling with like real intention to surrender to it. Not like, okay, well, dear diary, like last night I had pizza for dinner, like, yes, you can include that. And you've got to treat it like a practice and really have a practice mindset. So that's a place to start for me. And then, if a few minutes of meditation helps you get into the journaling mindset, cool, add meditation on ahead of journaling. If you're not a big reader and you like to listen to audiobooks, cool, then like do that later in the day, don't get the device involved right in the morning, so you could remove reading and do that later. And then like, yeah, if the journaling unlocks something for you and you're feeling open and you're like, wow, this is interesting, then like go to the brain dump and get the to-dos and the tasks and stuff out, because a lot of those things relate to each other, where you're really hung up on something kind of in the subconscious mind. And then you look at what you've been avoiding on your to-do list. You're like, well, no wonder. Okay. Like those are related. Like for me, it's like lately I've had a lot of journaling and stuff coming up around like financial scarcity and our financial goals and stuff costing more these days than I thought it would. So all these goals aren't being met. And then I look at what's on my to-do list and I'm like, I totally forgot to file I did an extension on my taxes and they were due October 15th and it's October 17th. And I just forgot to email them to my accountant. I'm like, oh my God, what an idiot, but Lindsay, like this has been on your mind for months and you just didn't write it down. So there's like real life, real time example for me. So that's where I would start, is journaling. And then you can add on like the prep stuff, like meditation ahead of it. And then after journaling, you could add on the brain dump and kind of the prioritization for the day in one practice, in one sitting kind of.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I would love for you to share with us now, just as we wrap up this episode a little bit, how our listeners can engage with you, whether it's through the Motherload podcast, through your coaching. How can our listeners engage with you? What does the work look like?
Yeah. So probably the best way to start is, listen to the podcast. You'll get a sense for how I speak and my belief systems and how I help people. I'm pretty candid there. And all my interviews are pretty candid in terms of the questions I ask my interviewees are probably questions I would ask you as a client. And then I love Instagram. That's the only real social media platform that I am competent on. I know others exist, but I don't really know how to use them. So Instagram, I'm always up for a DM, like shoot me a DM at Lindsay Roselle or at motherload.pod. And then we've got a lot coming. This whole like home edit for your mental load service combo between a coaching program that has this consultative aspect to it, where we also do some of it for you, depending on what you need, a little bit of done for you, like let us help systematize this thing for you, or we'll set this up for you. That service is coming. I have a couple people in like the beta program right now, and it'll come on full force in the next couple months. I have a mastermind launching. I also have a plant medicine mastermind launching in collaboration with a friend. So if you're interested in microdosing, that will be what that focus is. Those are all going to be on my Instagram. And I can answer any questions via DM on Instagram, I would say.
Sounds great. And we will absolutely follow along with all of those to it and make sure that we kind of link up some of those masterminds and programs as you release them. So for anyone listening, continue to check back on our show notes. We will have all of that. And Lindsay, thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please help us out and leave a review wherever you listen, and consider sharing with your friends. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the project or want to share your story, please visit our website linked in our show notes below.